the last spark of a vanishing craft. Some traditions fade quietly, slipping out of the world without ceremony. Others cling to existence with fragile, flickering light, kept alive by the hands of few who refuse to let them die. This is a story of a restaurant guarding the final ember of a culinary craft the world had nearly forgotten, a craft whispered about in old kitchens, but rarely seen anymore. In an age of rapid innovation and globalized taste, ancient techniques once passed from elder to apprentice began disappearing one by one. Modern chefs favored speed over patience, efficiency over ritual, spectacle over soul, and scattered across the world. The last masters of forgotten crafts grew older, watching their life's work slip into obscurity. Yet in a small, remote village, one tiny restaurant still practiced a technique so rare that even scholars believed it had vanished decades ago. To understand how this final spark survived, we must begin with the man who inherited it. His father and grandfather had devoted their lives to preserving the craft, an exacting method that required hours of meticulous preparation, a sensitivity to fire and timing, and an emotional intuition no recipe could ever teach. From childhood, he was raised not just to cook, but to listen, to the sound of ingredients changing, to the rhythm of simmering, to the quiet shifts in fragrance that signal when a dish carried the essence of generations. But as he came of age, he watched the world around him transform. Younger cooks left the village for city kitchens. Suppliers switched to faster, cheaper methods. Locals stopped requesting the traditional dish, choosing modern flavors instead. Even his own friends gently suggested he modernize his menu before the restaurant faded completely. Tradition, they said, was becoming irrelevant. Still, he persisted. Night after night, he lit the same fire his ancestors had tended. He prepared the dish with the same deliberate movements, knowing each step connected him to a lineage that stretched back centuries. Yet doubt crept into his heart. What was the point of preserving a craft no one cared to taste anymore? How long could he sustain a tradition the world seemed determined to forget? Then one winter evening, a traveler arrived. Someone who had heard rumors of dying craft kept alive in a hidden corner of the country. They tasted the dish with a reverence the chef had not seen in years. Their quiet, awestruck reaction carried a spark of recognition, a spark strong enough to pierce the chef's growing despair. He didn't know it yet, but that single spark would soon set in motion a chain of events that would determine whether craft lived on or vanished forever. News of the traveler's experience spread faster than the chef expected. At first, it was only a modest article, an online post on a niche culinary blog describing the dish as a living relic and the restaurant as a doorway into a world almost lost. But the tone of the piece carried something rare: wonder, respect, a sense that the writer had stumbled upon not just a meal, but a fading piece of human history. Within days, curious visitors began making the long journey to the remote village. They arrived with quiet anticipation, unsure what they would find. Some came from nearby towns. Others traveled across oceans. They entered the restaurant carrying questions, nostalgia, and a hunger that went beyond food. Yet the chef felt a growing anxiety. The craft he protected was fragile. It required long hours of preparation and emotional focus that could not be rushed. The dish existed in the narrow space between patience and intuition. Preparing it for one person was demanding. Preparing it for many felt nearly impossible. Still, he tried, stretching his stamina, his discipline, and his faith. At first, the guests responded with reverence. They sat quietly, observing the ritual-like pacing of the kitchen. They tasted slowly, understanding that this was no ordinary dish. Some cried softly, overwhelmed by the feeling of tasting something so ancient it seemed to echo with countless lives before theirs. But as attention grew, so did expectation. Food critics arrived with sharpened pens, ready to judge a tradition they barely understood. Influencers demanded photos and quick service, oblivious to the delicacy of the craft. Tourists treated the dish like a rare collectible, something to check off a list. Their presence, unintentional yet disruptive, began to strain the rhythm of the kitchen. The chef felt his control slipping like sand through tired fingers. Suppliers sensed opportunity and pressured him to increase output. Investors contacted him with grand proposals: expand the restaurant, commercialize the craft, turn the rare dish into a global sensation. They spoke of preserving tradition, But he heard only the machinery of profit. Their promises made his stomach twist. And beneath the noise, the chef felt a deeper fear rising. What if, in trying to save the craft, he was hastening its destruction? What if attention, well-meaning or not, was the very thing that would break the fragile lineage he had sworn to protect? The tension reached a peak one stormy evening when a renowned culinary academy sent a delegation to evaluate whether the dish should be designated as an official cultural treasure. Their arrival brought a sense of pressure unlike anything the chef had experienced. They observed his every movement. They whispered among themselves. They asked questions that felt less like curiosity and more like examination. The dish they tasted that night was technically flawless, every step correct, every detail perfect. And yet, the chef knew something was missing. The heart, the quiet thread connecting him to his ancestors. The part of the craft invisible to observers, but essential to its soul. As the evaluators prepared their report, the chef stood alone in the dim kitchen. He stared at the embers of the fire that had been tended by 3 generations before him. He wondered whether this ancient craft could survive the modern world's hunger to claim, categorize, and consume everything it touched. The decision that awaited him would determine whether the craft lived on unchanged or became a museum piece stripped of its meaning. The morning after the evaluator's visit, an uneasy quiet settled over the village. The chef moved through his kitchen with the heaviness of a man carrying more than exhaustion. He replayed the previous night in his mind, the perfect movements, the flawless timing, the impeccable technique. And yet, beneath that meticulous execution, he could feel the absence of something vital. The dish had lived, but it had not breathed. The evaluators praised the skill, but their approval felt strangely hollow. They spoke in terms of preservation, classification, cultural value. They wanted to protect the craft by freezing it in time, turning it into a symbol locked behind the glass walls of official recognition. They believed this would ensure its survival, but the chef knew better than anyone. A tradition stripped of its soul does not live on. It becomes display, not memory. Ceremony, not connection. As days passed, the village filled with visitors, more than ever before. Some came with reverence. Others came with entitlement, claiming the craft belonged to the nation rather than the family that had kept it alive. Arguments erupted between tourists and locals. Lines wrapped around the restaurant. The pace threatened to overpower the delicate rhythm the dish required. The fire burned hotter than it should. The chef felt his intuition slipping under the weight of other people's expectations. One afternoon, chaos broke the fragile balance. A demanding group insisted the dish be served faster. When told this was impossible, they grew angry, accusing the chef of exploiting tradition for fame. Voices rose. A pot shattered. The young apprentice, who had trained under the chef for years, stood frozen, watching the sanctity of the craft unravel before their eyes. That night, after the guests had gone and the village fell into a restless silence, the apprentice approached the chef. Their voice trembled as they asked a question the chef had feared for months. Are we preserving the craft or destroying it? The word struck with unbearable truth. The chef felt a sharp ache bloom in his chest. He had spent his life guarding a flame passed down through generations, yet now that flame flickered in danger, not from neglect, but from exposure. He walked outside into the cold night, the wind carrying the distant echoes of tourists and curious travelers. He looked toward the mountains where his father had once gathered herbs, toward the fields where his grandfather taught him how to sense the fire's breath. He felt their presence beside him, not as memory, but as a quiet urging. The decision he faced was impossible. Choose recognition and allow the craft to be reshaped by the world, or retreat and risk its disappearance altogether. As he stood beneath the stars, the truth settled slowly into place. The craft was never meant for crowds. It was never meant to be perfect, replicable, or widely consumed. It lived in the fragile space between hands and heart, passed carefully from one soul to the next. If he allowed the world to claim it, the lineage would break. If he protected it, it might survive, but only in fewer hands than ever before. The storm inside him grew heavier with each passing minute. The future of the craft hung in the balance, suspended between preservation and loss. And whichever path he chose, something precious would be sacrificed. The emotional peak was rising, and the weight of generations pressed against his chest. The moment of decision was approaching, one that would determine not only the fate of a dish, but the legacy of an entire lineage. The morning arrived with clarity the chef had not felt in months. The air was crisp, the village quiet, the fire in his kitchen still unlit. He sat alone at the wooden table his father once carved, running his fingers along the grooves worn smooth by decades of work. He understood, finally, that the craft did not belong to the world. It did not belong to evaluators, tourists, or institutions. It belonged to the lineage that carried it, tended it, breathed life into it with each careful movement. And now, that lineage rested in his hands. When the evaluators returned with their final proposal, an official cultural designation that would turn the craft into national heritage, everyone in the village gathered to hear the announcement. Cameras flashed. Reporters waited. The evaluators spoke proudly of preservation, tourism, and the importance of protecting a dying art. Then they handed the chef the official document. All he needed to do was sign. He looked down at the paper, heavy with promise and consequence. If he signed, the craft would be preserved, yes, but also transformed into something rigid and performative. If he refused, he risked letting the world forget a piece of history that had shaped generations of his family. The room held its breath. Slowly, he placed a pen on the table. "I cannot sign," he said quietly. Shock rippled through the evaluators. Gasps escaped the crowd. Cameras clicked frantically. But the chef continued, voice steady. "This craft cannot survive as performance. It cannot be taught in classrooms or displayed behind glass. It lives only when passed from one set of hands to another, with patience, with heart, with time. If you turn it into heritage, you'll preserve its shell and destroy its soul." The evaluators protested. They warned of disappearance, of responsibility, of cultural loss. But the chef shook his head gently. "What disappears," he said, "is only what is no longer loved. And this craft is still loved." Then he turned to the young apprentice, standing near the doorway, eyes wide with fear and hope. "I choose to pass it on," he said. "Not everyone, not to the nation, to you." Tears shimmered in the apprentice's eyes as the weight of the lineage settled upon their shoulders. Around them, the crowd softened, realizing that they were witnessing not an act of refusal, but an act of devotion, and understanding that some traditions survive not by being displayed, but by being lived. As the evaluators left, frustrated and bewildered, the chef and the apprentice returned to the kitchen. They lit the fire together. They prepared the ancient dish with deliberate movements, not rushed, not watched, not recorded, just shared. That evening, they served only one bowl. The chef tasted it first, letting the flavor carry him through centuries of memory. Then he nodded to the apprentice, who tasted their own creation for the first time as the rightful heir to the craft. It was imperfect. It was beautiful. It was alive. In the months that followed, the crowds faded. The tourists moved on. The blog posts stopped. And slowly, the village returned to its quiet rhythm. But in the small kitchen behind the wooden door, the craft endured, not as spectacle, but as lineage. Not as artifact, but as heart. Some traditions do not need to be saved by the world. They need to be carried, gently, faithfully, by the few who understand their worth. And in that humble kitchen, surrounded by silence and memory, the craft lived on. Subscribe to join the journey.